By the mid-1980s, the space race had evolved far beyond the question of who reached the moon first. What really mattered now was which nation could maintain a human presence in Earth's orbit for the longest period, operate more resilient space stations, and secure a technological edge that could redefine global power. For both the United States and the Soviet Union, this wasn't just scientific progress. It was a matter of strategic dominance. And in that era, the Soviets believed they held a major advantage with the Salyut 7 station, placed into orbit in 1982. To them, it wasn't only a platform for scientific experiments, but a symbolic declaration of strength toward the Western world. Yet, in the middle of all this political tension, a very different kind of discussion quietly emerged. Several crew members aboard the station claimed they had witnessed something extraordinary outside their window. Something massive, glowing, and shaped unlike anything familiar. According to their accounts, the figures looked almost winged, spreading light across the darkness of orbit. And strangely enough, this wasn't even the first unusual claim from Soviet crews. Just a year earlier, in 1981, Vladimir Kovalinok, another cosmonaut working aboard Salyut 7, admitted he had seen something that defied explanation. At first, it appeared no more than a distant point of light. But within moments, the object morphed into two interconnected spheres before flashing intensely and disappearing entirely. What could these different crews have encountered? Were they looking at random optical distortions, misidentified space debris, or something that still resists a straightforward explanation? This documentary explores the strange events reported aboard Salyut 6 and Salyut 7 during the 1980s and searches for rational interpretations. To understand how these situations emerged, it helps to look back at the late 1960s, when the space race shifted from simple rivalry to a challenge of maintaining long-term presence in orbit. In 1971, the Soviets achieved a milestone by launching Salyut 1, the world's first crewed space station, but that accomplishment was soon overshadowed by tragedy. The Soyuz 11 crew, returning from Salyut 1, lost their lives after a sudden drop in cabin pressure during re-entry. It was a harsh reminder of how even the smallest malfunction in orbit could be fatal. Because of this, later stations such as Salyut 4 and Salyut 5 were redesigned with stronger life support systems and safer energy management. Even then, the missions faced new complications, including electrical failures and mechanical issues that limited how long crews could safely remain in orbit. These challenges pushed Soviet engineers to rethink the structure of their next generation of orbital platforms. That effort eventually led to the launch of Salyut 6 on September 29, 1977. Unlike the stations before it, Salyut 6 introduced a dual docking system, allowing two different vehicles to connect at the same time. One port could host the crew's spacecraft, while the other welcomed supply vehicles, enabling longer missions and more flexible operations in orbit. This upgrade marked a pivotal turning point for the Soviet program, because earlier stations limited crews strictly to the supplies they carried with them. With resupply missions now possible, orbital stays stretched across months, transforming Salyut 6 into a continuously operating laboratory. But the station's legacy would become defined not only by technical improvements, but also by one of the most mysterious incidents ever reported in low Earth orbit, beginning shortly after the arrival of the Soyuz T-4 crew. On March 12, 1981, the Soyuz T-4 spacecraft docked with Salyut 6. The crew was scheduled to remain for roughly 3 months, conducting routine scientific work throughout their mission. Everything proceeded normally until an event in early May altered the course of the mission's history. On May 5, during an ordinary observation session, Mission Commander Vladimir Kovalinok noticed something strange outside the station's window. At first, he assumed the light he saw was nothing more than a reflection, or perhaps the glint of a distant satellite. But within seconds, that assumption collapsed. The point of light began to change shape, expand, and transform until it resembled two connected spheres suspended in the void. According to his later descriptions, the object seemed to drift near the station, radiating an unusual sense of internal motion, as if something energetic was occurring within it. Kovalinok watched in silence until the object suddenly flared with an intense flash and vanished completely, leaving only darkness behind. Despite the shock of the moment, he filed no report and spoke to no one officially. The reason was simple. Within the Soviet space program, success was highlighted, while ambiguous or unexplained observations were often buried. Any astronaut who claimed to witness something unusual risked being dismissed or removed from future assignments. For that reason, Kovalenok shared the experience only with a small circle of trusted acquaintances for many years. Only after retiring and after the collapse of the Soviet Union did he finally discuss the incident openly in interviews, admitting he had no idea what he had witnessed. His crewmate aboard Salyut 6, Viktor Saviniuk, took a much more reserved approach. Although he was present on the station at the time of the event, he avoided giving details in interviews and never directly contradicted Kovalenok's claims. That silence made the case even more perplexing. What could the commander have seen? There is no definitive explanation today, but several scientific hypotheses have been suggested. One idea proposes that the object might have been a small fragment that had detached from the station itself. Spacecraft often shed tiny particles over time, such as paint chips, bolts, or insulation debris. Under the right lighting conditions, such fragments could appear unusual or distorted. Yet this theory fails to account for the brief but powerful flash of light Kovalenok described, nor the impression of internal energy. For that reason, some researchers suggest the object may have been another satellite passing at a distance and illuminated in a way that created an optical effect from the crew's perspective. During the early 1980s, low Earth orbit had essentially become a crowded graveyard of aging satellites. Both the United States and the Soviet Union were launching hundreds of reconnaissance, communication, and military platforms, and many of these objects reflected sunlight so intensely that people on Earth often mistook them for shooting stars. For that reason, some researchers suggested that the light Kovalenok saw might simply have been a passing satellite. But the problem was this. According to his description, the object approached the station, changed shape, and then rapidly moved away. The idea of two connected spheres also didn't match any known satellite reflection, so this explanation failed to resolve the mystery. Another hypothesis explored a more physiological route. Some experts proposed that the event might have been caused by a phosphine reaction, a phenomenon in which the eye perceives flashes or shapes even in complete darkness. Astronauts outside Earth's protective atmosphere frequently report brief bursts of light caused by cosmic rays striking the retina. These high-energy particles pass through spacecraft walls and collide directly with the eye's sensory cells, producing sudden flashes, distorted shapes, or drifting points of light. A few specialists argued that Kovalenok might have experienced exactly that. But there was a flaw in this theory as well. Phosphines are internal effects of vision and do not appear as clearly defined objects floating outside the spacecraft. They do not behave like structured forms approaching and then retreating. So this explanation also fell short. Beyond the scientific interpretations, the event attracted more speculative theories. The most extreme among them suggested that Kovalenok might have witnessed an extraterrestrial craft. Supporters of this idea pointed to the object's apparent movement toward the station and its unusual dual-sphere shape, insisting that neither space debris nor a physiological illusion could account for what he described. But despite all the speculation, no definitive explanation has ever been identified. Whether the commander observed an unknown spacecraft or an unusual physical phenomenon remains unresolved. More than 4 decades later, the event from 1981 still stands as one of the unexplained anomalies reported aboard Salyut 6. What makes the story even more intriguing is that this wasn't the only unusual incident tied to the Soviet orbital program. Just a few years later, another crew aboard Salyut 7 reported an experience that was far more dramatic and much harder to rationalize. Launched on April 19, 1982, Salyut 7 was built as an advanced successor to earlier stations, addressing system failures and safety problems that had troubled previous missions. The new station featured upgraded life support systems, a more efficient water recycling network, and improved solar arrays. Positioned in an orbit between roughly 200 and 280 kilometers, it circled Earth every 90 minutes. At that pace, the crew witnessed 16 sunrises and sunsets each day and maintained regular contact with ground control throughout their missions. Between 1982 and 1986, Salyut 7 hosted 12 crewed expeditions, and among those missions, the one that captured the public's attention more than any other took place in 1984. That year, 3 members of the Salyut 7 crew, Vladimir Janabekov, Svetlana Savitskaya, and Igor Volk, reported one of the strangest incidents ever associated with a crewed orbital mission. On their 150th day aboard the station, they noticed a sudden, brilliant flash outside the windows. At first, they assumed it was a reflection from the sun, something completely ordinary in low Earth orbit. But within moments, it became clear that the light was not stationary. It was moving steadily toward the station, and the closer it came, the more defined its shape became. According to their account, the crew realized they were not looking at random light, but at figures resembling enormous humanoid forms drifting alongside the station. Estimates placed their height between 20 and 30 meters, and a soft orange glow radiated from their bodies, reflecting faintly against the exterior of the station. The most distinctive feature, the crew said, were the massive translucent wings extending from their backs, giving them an appearance unlike anything the cosmonauts had ever seen. The event, they claimed, lasted nearly 10 minutes. The figures seemed to maintain the same orbital path as the station, moving with it rather than drifting away. What made the situation even more perplexing was that a later crew reported witnessing something similar only weeks afterward. Two separate teams, at two separate times, recalling nearly identical encounters, created an enormous challenge for the mission analysts trying to make sense of what had happened. So the question became unavoidable. How much of this was real? Did the Salyut 7 crews genuinely see something extraordinary outside their station? Or was the experience a product of conditions inside the spacecraft? When the story first surfaced publicly in the 1990s, scientists and psychologists began examining the claims from multiple angles. One explanation suggested that extended exposure to isolation, altered gravity, limited sensory input, elevated carbon dioxide levels, and disrupted sleep cycles might have affected the crew's perception. Long-duration space missions are known to cause occasional visual or auditory distortions, and in rare cases, individuals may briefly lose their sense of grounded reality. These conditions could, in theory, generate hallucinations vivid enough to feel real. Even more surprising, NASA-supported research has shown that such experiences can sometimes be shared among multiple crew members. Under certain psychological pressures, a group can develop what appears to be a collective hallucination, interpreting ambiguous stimuli in the same way. Other experts leaned toward a more physical explanation, suggesting that the crew might have witnessed an optical illusion caused by specific reflections unique to low Earth orbit. Sunlight bouncing off external structures, antennas, panels, loose fragments, or nearby debris can create brief moving shapes that appear animated when viewed from certain angles. Multiple reflections can break or distort the light, causing a shape to appear to change or shift as the observer moves. In some cases, these reflections can produce unexpected colors or intensities that make the effect seem more dramatic than it really is. But the difficulty remains. If the phenomenon was merely an illusion or a misinterpreted reflection, why did a later crew describe something so similar? The second report complicates the optical illusion hypothesis and raises questions about whether the earlier incident truly was just a trick of perception. At this point, only one explanation remains: the possibility that the entire story never happened at all. When this claim is examined closely, it becomes clear that unlike the documented anomalies from Salyut 6, there is not a single piece of verifiable evidence supporting the Salyut 7 account. No video, no audio transmission, no internal mission report, nothing that would normally accompany an event of this scale. Even the basic details, the date, the mission designation, and what each crew member supposedly said contradict one another across different versions of the story. And when researchers traced the origin of the claim, they discovered that it only began circulating in the early 1990s with no identifiable source. Neither Soviet archival material, nor NASA monitoring logs, nor independent mission analyses contain any reference to such an incident. The Salyut 7 mission itself is thoroughly documented in declassified Soviet records. Large portions of the crew's radio communications from that period have been released to the public. Yet none of these materials include anything resembling an encounter with enormous winged beings or any unknown phenomenon matching the claims. Some accounts suggest the entire story may have begun as a joke told informally by cosmonaut Igor Volk among friends, perhaps an exaggerated anecdote that unintentionally spiraled into a myth. According to these retellings, Volk was reportedly shocked years later when he learned that Western publications had reported the story as if it were real. Its sudden popularity during the late 1990s, the early era of the public internet, further contributed to its spread. This was a time when UFO narratives, paranormal speculation, and conspiracy-driven articles gained massive traction online. Articles titled "Angels Seen Outside Salyut 7" circulated widely on English-language websites, often claiming the Soviets had deliberately suppressed the truth. In reality, the Soviet space program was far more likely to document unusual observations than to hide them. Unexplained incidents typically appeared in restricted technical files, and when the archives were opened after the collapse of the Soviet Union, not a single document referenced angel-like entities or encounters of any kind aboard Salyut 7. Taken together, the evidence points overwhelmingly to a simple conclusion. The so-called angels of Salyut 7 were either the result of a misinterpreted anecdote or a completely fictional narrative that grew into an urban legend over time. By all available accounts, the story is not grounded in fact. And that makes it one of the most fascinating examples of how myths can form in the vacuum of space exploration history. If you found this exploration interesting, make sure to subscribe for more deep dive documentary stories and leave a comment sharing your thoughts on this case.